Okay. So the first question is pretty much in sort of a, given the fact that there's a pretty crowded field, 5 candidates for this seat. I know it's not the most that have ever run for anything in this county, but it's close. How do you distinguish yourself from the pack?
I think a couple things, Liz. First of all, my experience. I started out in the field of civil law in LA County, working a complex caseload, including cases involving construction defect, cases involving products liability, cases involving toxic exposure, and very difficult types of litigation, usually with more than 10 defendants per case. So that alone, I think, distinguishes me from most of the pack, just due to the fact that this opening is initially going to be on assignment in the civil court, literally replacing Judge Dowling's seat. But it's more than that. I also have equally valuable criminal experience, both as a public defender and a DA, which no one else that I'm running against has. And I think that's important because I'm a balanced candidate. And my criminal law experience, again, like my civil experience, is varied and complex. I've done trials every year I've been a criminal attorney, and many of them were 3 strikes you're out cases. A number of them involved very complicated issues like DNA, ballistics, sexual assault evidence, with vulnerable victims of all ages from 3 years old up to 70. So I think I've pretty much experienced most things that can be thrown at you in the criminal arena. So my experience is one thing. The second thing is my value system. I would hope every candidate is going to follow the law, but I think the more important question for the public is what people are going to do when the law is not clear or there is no law on the books. And so certainly examining a candidate's values should be a very heavy question for voters. What does this person actually stand for, and what do they believe? Because that will shed some light on how things proceed where it is murky or gray. And I think for me, my values are pretty simple. I'm hardworking. I believe that hard work and competence are to be essential to government employees and frankly all employees. I've worked in the private sector and the public sector. That's important. I love kids, I love pets, I love elders. I think that's an important consideration too. I live here locally, I'm very familiar with local issues, and so I think that sets me apart as well. I know where juvenile delinquents are likely to hang out and get into trouble. I know where the homeless people reside. I know where all sorts of interesting things happen, and where people are likely to be both victimized or to look to buy drugs. Mm-hmm. So I think those types of specialized knowledge about our local community, again, are telling in my experience. And so when you ask a question like that, it's not a quick or simple thing to answer, mm-hmm. but basically, in summary, it's a combination of experience, values, and local knowledge that set me apart.
Could you expand a little bit on, you were talking about, looking at somebody's values in connection with cases where the law is murky. Could you maybe provide an example? Because I'm not really sure what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, for example, if there's no law on the books, especially in civil cases, explaining how the court would rule on something, and what I mean is there's no statute or case law, and you check both locally and then federally, mm-hmm. and usually there's some common law available through the English system that we inherit from our system of government, but where there are places where there are gaps, I think then you have to look at how someone's going to analyze what their thought process is. And for me, it's a combination of common sense and looking at, again, your value system and the way you make judgments. And when I look at things and I'm not clear as to, gee, what would be fair, mm-hmm. I think, for example, that having more information and knowledge about a subject is important. That's one thing. And then looking at equitable principles is another thing that I would do. For example, people in business always know that it's caveat emptor, which means buyer beware in Latin. And so the presumption in unclear things with contracts is that the buyer is to beware of what he or she is purchasing. So I would rely on jurisprudence and ethics to make sound decisions and look back in time at how other judges have muddled through things that they weren't clear on to make good decisions. And that's not always easy. So like I said, I'm hardworking, I'm financially responsible both at home and in my job. I sit on the law library board and am very fiscally responsible there. I've also sat on the DVSAC board, and again, knowing that I'm financially responsible, I would hope would be an important thing for the community. That I'm dedicated to our local citizens because I both live and work here, so my values are about the community. And of course, I'm, I think, one of the candidates that is outspoken about supporting victims' rights in addition to defendants' rights. So I think my balance is a key value that would come into play in deciding whether to vote for me or not.
And maybe kind of spinning off that, I mean, do you anticipate having any issues with transitioning from being a prosecutor to being a judge? And also, I think you know, the question could arise of the fact that you are in a long-term relationship with a sheriff's deputy. Does that, you know, how do you compartmentalize, I guess? And is that am I answering the question for you?
I find that hilarious, actually, because I've had to investigate law enforcement for criminal activity, so I can't imagine anyone that truly understands my background having any question about my ability to separate home from business. That's, you know, again, I find that kind of remarkable, but perhaps you weren't aware I worked for the Office of the Inspector General, Bureau of Independent Review, where I audited prison internal affairs cases. And of course, as a DA, I've worked on countless cases investigating allegations of police misconduct so that the police agencies can remain transparent. DA's offices nationwide often are asked to come in and do a criminal investigation on allegations involving police misconduct, because everyone wants to make sure that a third party is looking at these things, and knowing that I've been trusted with doing that, including on agencies locally, I would hope would reassure everyone that that's not going to be a problem. I'm going to be fair, Liz, and that's what I've dedicated my career to being.
I hope you understand that I know these things, but maybe our viewers or readers don't. So
Sure, no, and I invite anyone who has questions about my background to examine my qualifications by looking at my website, annaforjudge.com, and I'm happy to answer questions too. I actually pick up my phone and answer my emails and voicemails, and I'm happy to respond to public inquiry.
Two things that I have touched on, I think, in the past on this forums, but I kind of want to hit them again because I know the format doesn't necessarily allow for a lengthy or necessarily full answer, but I'd like your views on how sentencings have been affected by realignment, which has been in place for a couple of years now, and what your view is on that and whether that's been working locally.
Well, I can't give you a direct answer, and I know it's frustrating for the press and the public, and I get why, that judges are not allowed by the ethics of campaigning to answer questions like that. And even though I'm just a candidate, I still can't answer questions like that. So while I cannot comment directly on how I would sentence on any individual subject or comment on realignment in terms of how I perceive it's working, I can, I think, in fairness, say that Realignment is basically in general to describe what it's doing for public members who maybe haven't heard. An effort by the state to push inmates that would normally be housed in state prison by our local county jails, which of course is a net cost savings to the state and not a cost savings locally to our county governments. So basically, one net effect is most counties have overcrowded jails. Luckily for us, our jail is not overcrowded yet, although it will eventually impact that. So sure, there are some impacts locally I can comment on, and that's one of them, and certainly a concern for our future because community safety is a paramount goal, I would hope, for the court system in general.
And maybe I wasn't asking the question the way I really meant to. I guess it seems that that realignment and the fact that a lot of offenders who are nonviolent are staying locally rather than going to prison has really affected sentencing.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that.
Okay.
Nonviolent people were basically never going to prison before realignment or after. I think that's a myth and a common misperception. The people both before and after realignment that have been going to prison are typically violent offenders and people that have a long history of committing violent offenses like strikes. So I'm not sure I agree with that statement.
Okay, fair enough. What do you see, as somebody who is in the courthouse day in and day out, pretty much? I mean, what do you see the specific challenges are, both with the physical courthouse itself and just with the way the legal system is working in that courthouse?
Well, the physical courthouse, of course, is totally outdated and outmoded. The building is not in a good state of affairs, and it has nothing to do with the current administration of it. It's an old building. It's no one's fault. It's just outlived its natural lifespan, and that's common with many government buildings. And certainly it is not designed for current ADA compliance, meaning they have to literally help jurors or public members in wheelchairs or riding devices up the stairs because there is not a simple or easy ingress-egress area for people to do it themselves, which is frustrating. And I know I personally have seen people on riding chairs wedged in the door of the bathroom, unable to keep going forward or back out. They're literally stuck, which, is a tragedy and something I feel terrible about. But, what do you do? The court is not going to be rebuilt tomorrow. The funding simply isn't there, and I know that's frustrating, but unfortunately, because our county population is not huge, we're just not going to get queued up for that anytime soon is my suspicion. I hope I'm wrong, but I pretty much am sure I'm not, and I think we're going to suffer with the current court building that we have. That being said, what can we do better? Well, I know my biggest concern as a judge would be to use juror time efficiently. When people are kind enough to do their civic duty and come into court, not only should we honor that, as I hope all lawyers and people accessing the system clearly do, but make sure that we're really prepared to go forward right away. I would certainly never want jurors sitting around thumb twiddling or wasting time because people haven't prepared adequately for court to start. So I would be very careful to monitor that and ensure that the public's time is not wasted, because I feel very strongly that juror time is perhaps the most critical thing we should use as a resource.
Okay. Were there any other, particular challenges in this county?
Oh yeah,
okay.
I've practiced law from San Diego to Sacramento on both state and federal court, and frankly, this area has hideous parking for jurors. It's shocking for a county of this size and one that really has no traffic or other problems associated with, parking typically, that we would have such poor parking. And, again, Nevada City, when it was, I guess you would call it designed, in the first case, was meant for mule trains and, donkeys, not cars. So we're stuck with an infrastructure that's not well suited to having large groups of people coming in individual cars. That being said, I think there are some better ways that we could try to get people to court for jury service, because the parking is terrible. And I know I would try very hard to work with Nevada City Police to get around the meters, and the time restrictions for jurors, because it is so difficult. Many of our local citizens are elderly and have a difficult time, especially in the winter when there's snow and ice on the ground. And that's terrible, because we're relying on these people, again, without salary, to come in and do a citizen's job, which is expected but still above and beyond when it's snowy and icy.
Also, and again, this is something I brought up in the forum, but even despite the fact that I've written about this and we actually ran a column by Judge Dowling on this issue, I think there's still a lot of lack of understanding for the public as to, what happens with people who get arrested and who seem to have very low bail and are immediately out and commit another crime before they even, for instance, get arraigned. What is the judicial role in that?
Well,
And-
bail,
sorry, and bail
yeah,
schedules.
no, I didn't mean to overtalk with you, but
Yeah.
the bail situation is difficult because misdemeanor bail is set by statute. That's not something that our local folk have any control over. And frankly, I think a lot of what the public perception of revolving door justice is based on is the lower level offenders that are misdemeanants, that are committing very low offenses, that have typically $5,000 bail, which means all you have to do is post a very nominal sum of money and you're out. Or, because it's so low, if it's less than $10,000, the jail can just cite you out in essence. So there is a perception of that because of what we're stuck with a statewide misdemeanor bail. That being said, I do believe that our felony bail schedule is on the low side. And I know that's something both my boss Cliff Newell and I have repeatedly taken to the courts. It's something the court is receptive to talking to us about every year, and I know I personally have taken copies of surrounding counties' bail schedules to compare and shown where I thought some of the discrepancies were that affect our community in a public safety way. The court is, of course, entitled to its own viewpoint and won't always agree with me, and even if I'm seated as a judge, I may be in the minority on this position, but I certainly think that my track record as your assistant DA has been to try to protect public safety and get the critical felonies bail schedule to be raised, including child molest, rape, key striker felonies of a very violent nature, which are low, although they have been raised over the past 7 years since I came here. But it continues to be an issue. We're going to continue to keep addressing it with the court and pressing for the type of bail that we would hope would protect the public in the best possible way.
Okay. This is something that has come up peripherally, not specifically addressed at you, but it does involve you, so it's something that I wanted to ask you about. There, in the DA's race, there have been allegations that there has been a lot of turmoil in the DA's office, some of which has been centered around you as manager. How would you address those concerns?
Sure. Well, frankly, DA's offices do have turnover. That's not just something endemic to Nevada County. That's something that happens everywhere. So that shouldn't surprise anyone. But I know that I feel very strongly that government workers should work 8 hours a day. That's what they're paid for. And so I know that was somewhat revolutionary for my employees to hear when I arrived here 7 years ago. And there was a bit of time getting used to actually doing an 8-hour day. But I think the public expects that of us, and just because we're government workers does not mean that we should not be held accountable. So, it is somewhat amusing to me that that would be a contested point, because it seems to me that the public and most people work the hours that they're paid for, and would certainly hope that of all people, a DA's office would be held accountable for that. We're supposed to be putting our best face forward, Liz, and we wear the white hat in court, so we should certainly, I think, hold ourselves to the same standard that we would hold other people, and be a good representative of our local government. So yes, I do hold people accountable to things like that, and there will always be people that don't like that, and that doesn't surprise me either. Any organization is going to have some individuals that don't want to excel. That's unfortunate, but that's life. So all I can do is ensure that we have people that are working on the clock and held accountable for their time. We do encourage people, of course, to take vacation and leave so that they do come to work refreshed and eager to work. But I can't make everyone into a good worker, and if I could, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd have my own talk show or be on a worldwide tour giving speeches, because I don't think anyone can do what you're saying, and Bill Gates can't even make all of his employees high functioning. So we do what we can, and it's always a battle. Our pay scale, when you look at the surrounding counties, is low, and so it's a struggle to attract and keep good people. And that's, of course, what happens in DA's offices statewide, is the real excellent workers get looked at by other industry and plucked away for more money and benefits. So it's a hard thing to manage, and certainly we're always on the development side looking for the future, and we have a great program of mentoring law clerks and legal interns to hopefully drum up interest in working in our smaller area, because we do have some attractive perks that many other offices don't. We're able to let people take cases to trial much more quickly in their career than they would ever expect to in any large community, and there's a lot more hands-on training with folk. So there are some good benefits for people who do work for us as volunteers, and we try to encourage that. And I think we have something like 5 law clerks right now working for free for our office, which is great.
That's always a good trick.
No, they're great. They work really hard. I'm really proud of our intern staff. It's wonderful.
Is there anything that I haven't covered, or any particular issue that you'd like to bring up, or anything about yourself that you wanted to
Sure.
share?
I guess in closing, the only thing I want to say is I'm a normal person. I'm a taxpayer voter. I live here. I work here. I know what's going on in our community and where the problem spots seem to keep chronically cropping up. So I'm very vested and knowledgeable about our local issues, and I really do care. So again, I invite people to look at my website, annaforjudge.com, and contact me if you have questions. There's a prompt on the last contact page of my website where people can communicate with me directly, and I do respond to all inquiries. I have a Facebook page too, and I know often the younger generation are more apt at using that than maybe some of our elders, but we do have a great community. I'd like to stay working in the courts, and I love being in trial. I think it's where my passion lies. And while I've been super lucky to achieve the career goals I've set for myself, and I feel like I've achieved all the current ones I have, I think it would be great to have the additional ongoing challenge of learning to be a great judge. So that's why I'm asking people to vote for me. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.